In the late 16th and 17th centuries, the momentum of global trade was pulled towards South Asia. While European powers were still navigating the early stages of overseas expansion, the Indian subcontinent had already established a degree of economic integration that dwarfed its contemporaries. Data from the era reveals the scale of this dominance. The Mughal Empire produced 24.5% of the entire world's manufacturing output, outpacing every nation in Europe combined. This wasn't just raw material extraction, it was an urban phenomenon. 17 million people lived in Mughal cities by 1600, a total urban population larger than all of Europe's at the time. This concentration of people generated significant individual wealth. When we measure wheat wages, the amount of food a single day's labor can actually buy, we find that a Mughal laborer in 1595 earned 1.2% more than their counterpart would 3 centuries later under British rule. This peak of early modern wealth had a remarkably humble starting point. In 1526, a displaced Central Asian ruler named Babur entered northern India with a small, specialized force to challenge the established sultanate. The transformation of that small invading force into a global center of manufacturing was the result of a specific administrative and military framework. Building this wealth required a complete monopoly on violence. At the Battle of Panipat, Babur faced a massive opposition, but he possessed a technological edge that rendered traditional cavalry tactics obsolete. He deployed Ottoman field artillery. These heavy bronze cannons shattered defensive formations and allowed a smaller, more mobile army to dismantle regional strongholds. The infantry were similarly advanced, carrying matchlock rifles that provided a lethal, ranged advantage. This technological superiority was the foundation of the Gunpowder Empire. By securing the borders through force, the Mughals achieved a first requirement for economic growth, a long-term internal peace that allowed trade to move without the constant threat of local warfare. Emperor Akbar approached the empire with the mindset of a system designer. He prioritized the structural integrity of the state over simple conquest, building a bureaucracy focused on data and efficiency. He introduced the zabt system, which replaced a disorganized tribute model with a strict monetary tax. The state surveyed land with unprecedented detail to calculate exact yields, and then demanded those taxes be paid in cash. This forced a behavioral change across the countryside. To obtain the necessary currency, peasant farmers had to stop growing only what they consumed and start selling their surplus in local markets. To make this system work, the empire needed a currency that merchants and farmers could trust over vast distances. The state standardized the silver rupee. Maintaining 96% purity created a reliable medium of exchange, free from debasement for over a century. Combined with a massive road network, this uniform currency allowed goods to move through a single, regulated common market. Akbar's administrative reforms successfully converted a fragmented feudal landscape into a centralized economic machine. The government funded massive irrigation systems that boosted crop yields, while also providing tax incentives for farmers to grow valuable cash crops like cotton and indigo. This agricultural surplus effectively subsidized a massive labor force. With the food supply secured, millions of workers were able to leave the fields and enter the manufacturing sector. The Bengal Suba province became the empire's industrial hub. It turned out massive volumes of cotton textiles and muslins, while also housing an advanced shipbuilding industry that produced over 200,000 tons of vessel capacity annually. As Europe's demand for these finished goods grew, the trade balance tilted heavily toward India. Silver and gold from the Americas and Europe flowed east, accumulating in the Mughal treasury in exchange for manufactured textiles. The state transitioned from harvesting raw materials to exporting finished goods, positioning itself as the central node in the early modern trade loop. This concentration of wealth eventually funded a period of extreme cultural investment and consumption by the Mughal elite. Architectural projects like the Taj Mahal were the physical output of this industrial surplus. These monuments were only possible because the state had successfully centralized the subcontinent's vast agricultural and manufacturing output. This period also saw the birth of the Hindustani language and a unique Indo-Persian culture, reflecting an empire that had successfully integrated its diverse regional populations into a single identity. However, the very system that created this wealth required constant maintenance. The bureaucracy was fueled by land grants, which meant the state needed a continuous supply of new territory to reward its officers. Under Emperor Aurangzeb, the empire pushed into the Deccan Plateau. These wars lasted decades and expanded the borders to their maximum extent, but the military costs finally began to exceed the revenue coming in. The central bureaucracy eventually lost its grip. Regional governors and local elites realized they could stop sending revenue to the capital and instead keep the wealth to build their own independent kingdoms. By the time of the 1857 rebellion, the system had completely fractured. The image of the last emperor in exile stands as a stark endpoint for an empire that once produced a quarter of the world's wealth. When the British East India Company eventually assumed power, they did not build the economy from the ground up. They co-opted the sophisticated taxation, currency, and manufacturing networks the Mughals had already engineered, making the empire the true architect of the modern South Asian economy.